Good afternoon and welcome to the presentation of the Lake Eola Master Plan. My name is John Perrone. I'm the City of Orlando Parks Division Manager, and I'm here to welcome you and thank you for participating in today's presentation. Over a period of time, starting in January of 2020, we started this process with our consultants, GAI, and the Community Solutions Group. They started to make a plan on how we were going to make Lake Eola the place it should be for the next 30 to 50 years. And about that time, as you might remember, is when COVID hit, and we had to change a lot of how our participation in this process was going to happen. GAI and their consultants did a fantastic job of coming up with ways to integrate online presentations, questions and surveys that went out, and over 3,000 people responded to that. And I just wanted to first give them a shout out for changing that presentation, for changing the way that we did this and do it in such a short period of time. We turned a 9-month project into an 18-month project because of COVID. Consultants did a fantastic job. The City of Orlando is happy now to present to you the presentation of the 30% conceptual master plan for Lake Eola Park. Now I'm going to introduce Frank Bellamo with GAI.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. And thanks really to all of you for attending this afternoon. We really appreciate your involvement and your assistance through the last 18 to 20 months, and certainly appreciate your continued interest in the project. You've met John from the City of Orlando. There are other folks from the city that are with us today, and I want to go ahead and acknowledge them. Mercedes Blanca is with us. She is a project manager with the Downtown Development Board and the Community Redevelopment Agency. Chris Wallace is the city's cultural arts manager. Chris is with us today. Tara Russakoff is the communications manager with the city, and Susan Harris is the assistant director of the Office of Communications. So we certainly appreciate all their continued help and support. From GAI on our side and the Community Solutions Group, Donald Wishart, who is a landscape architect and a director of our landscape architecture studio. Sheba West is a landscape architect and community design manager. That is not my dog barking in the background, by the way. Andrea Penuela is a landscape designer. And then a really key consultant that's assisted us with the project is Rhodes and Brito Architects, and Max Brito is with us this morning or this afternoon as well. And Max will be speaking to you all in a bit and unveiling some of the architectural components of the project. So just a really quick reminder that the presentation is being recorded. If there's a reason that you'd like to see things maybe that you had missed or watch the presentation again, or if there are folks that you know of that just could not make this meeting but would like to have seen the presentation, you all can go to orlando.gov/eolaplan, where this presentation will be posted. And now we're going to take a moment for a greeting from Mayor Buddy Dyer and Commissioner Regina Hill.
Hello, I'm Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. Thank you for participating in the final Lake Eola Master Plan meeting. Your involvement is a critical part of how we re-envision the park. Your input is appreciated, and your passion for the park will guide us through the coming decades. We've come a long way since the park was last renovated over 30 years ago. Countless events, both large and small, now bring millions of visitors to the park each year. We should all be excited that together we are planning to ensure that it remains a destination for residents and visitors in the future. Thank you for being part of the process to shape the future of Lake Eola Park and all of downtown Orlando.
Greetings, I am Commissioner Regina Hill, City of Orlando, District 5. I take this opportunity to say thank you to our partners, GAI Consultant and Rhodes and Brito, for your hard work and leadership in putting this project together, for making a more vibrant and user-friendly park for all to enjoy in the future. And thanks to all of you for bringing your ideas to the table to help make Lake Eola Park a better place for everyone. Without your input, we would not have been able to put together such a robust plan for our community and city. It is because partners like you that continue to help improve the lives of residents in our city, providing opportunities for them to get fit, have fun, and enjoy their lives in a beautiful park setting. Thank you again.
We are really happy to have with us today a great supporter of downtown, its downtown neighborhoods, and especially Eola Park. Commissioner Patty Sheehan is with us. Commissioner Sheehan, a couple of words.
Yeah, thanks so much, Frank. And Lake Eola Park is located in beautiful District 4, and we have really spent a lot of time as the residents of District 4 caring, having eyes on the park, and this has become our signature park. Lake Eola Park wasn't always a nice place to go. We've had some challenges over the years, and we really have needed to put the care, effort, and energy and funding into it. And that's what this master plan is really about. And I would really like to thank the Community Redevelopment Agency. When no one else would make the investments in Lake Eola Park, they did so. So I shout out to Thomas Chapman, the DDB, because this is really Downtown Development Board, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to do things like the Christmas tree and done a lot of the really important projects, and even the community supporting renovating the fountain when the fountain broke. That shows how important this icon is to our city. And I would really be remiss to not mention our park staff. It's hard when you have this many visitors coming to a park every day to keep it looking beautiful. I want to shout out to Chris Wallace, who managed the park for many years, who actually came up with the idea for lighting the park, which is now turned into a beautiful lighting, professionally done. Like I say, these are really important investments that we make in the park. But now we want to say is, okay, now people are coming to this park. It's become our signature park. What do we want to see in the future? So I'm delighted that everyone is participating. We want to make sure that this is done. It's hard to really balance the two. This is a natural amenity where we have our swans, where people like to walk and experience the wildlife. But we also have a lot of events. So we have an infrastructure like the band shell. How do we balance that nature with working together to make this really a beautiful, internationally known park? So thank you for your participation today. It's really vital to do that. I'm delighted to represent this area as we continue to move forward in making Lake Eola more and more beautiful in the future. Thank you so much for attending today.
There we go. Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate your continued support. This is our agenda, everybody, for today. I am going to talk in a second about our overall master plan process. I'll turn it over to Donald after that, and he's going to talk about the guiding principles of the overall design. And then we'll get into an overview of the plan itself from the overall plan of the park, but then we'll focus in on all of those areas that you see that are listed there, and you'll get to see a lot of the detail of the design work. At the end of that presentation, then we'll have an opportunity to try and answer as many questions as we can. And that being said, if you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. If you just click on that and type in whatever your questions are, not the chat button, but the Q&A, we'll be able to hopefully get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation today. So as I mentioned, the master plan process, it's really important, I think, that we talk about that and that you all understand, the process that we've gone through. It's critical that you understand that this is not something that we did in terms of the design that we did in a vacuum. There was a tremendous amount of background work that was done by the team in terms of just understanding the place and the park. Probably the most critical component was all of the public input that we received, and we really do appreciate that again. And so those were critical elements. And so this process really is a three-step process. The first being the foundation. And that's really where we gathered all that background information that I mentioned. Our team spent countless hours in the park. We're looking at all the existing physical conditions out there. We looked at the park's ecology. We've dealt with the drainage. We looked at the surrounding neighborhoods. We were given information from the city on a lot of the proposed upcoming downtown development that potentially could affect the park and so many other things that we investigated. We also did a detailed site analysis of entrances and gateways, the walkways, the tree canopy, architecture, general open space, and many, many other things that we analyzed as well. At that point, then we looked and we began our public outreach with smaller group stakeholder meetings. And there were several of those. Among the groups that we met with were members of neighborhood associations, condo associations. We talked to Bike Walk Central Florida. A really critical meeting that we had was with Chris Wallace and other event organizers to see how the park currently is functioning for them for those important events that we all enjoy attending. And so those were some of the stakeholder meetings. The survey was mentioned earlier by John. That was really critical information that we got. And I'll give you the details on how many folks of that participated in a minute. But that, again, that was really, really critical that folks participated, went to the website and filled out that survey. Our team had meetings then individually with the CRA, with the DDB. They were incredibly helpful. The Park and Rec Advisory Board was a participant. The city was good enough to set up an advisory board that did advise us as the designs were being developed, and that was made up of a number of city departments and representatives for those departments. So we thank them, and they were really helpful in the overall process and in that first step of the foundation. And then we had our first group of public meetings as well with participatory exercises that we held and had really good turnout to those. And at the end of which I think we really understood a lot of the design preferences from the folks that participated in those meetings. So that ended around November of 2020. We then moved into the exploring phase. At that point was when we developed the initial conceptual master plan, which was presented at a series of public workshops then in May. And we got a lot of feedback on that. Great input. We answered a number of questions about the plan. And then with that input, we moved now where we are today, which is part 3 that we call the vision. And it's the unveiling of the final master plan, and is a reflection of really everything that we've learned about the park and all that we heard from all of you that were good enough to participate. The last thing that we will be doing in terms of a deliverable is a final master plan report. So it'll be more than just the plan that you're going to see today, but an actual report in book form that will talk about the entire process. And then once that is complete, that will also be available at the city's website for you all to take a look at and read. So with that, one last thing that I wanted to mention, because again, your participation was so critical. We had over 2,800 responses to the survey that I mentioned, 5 overall public workshops with nearly 200 people participating. In the stakeholder groups, there were 7 groups total. So again, we thank everyone for their involvement. Okay, now with that, I'll turn it over to Donald. And Donald is going to talk about the guiding principles of our overall design. So Donald, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I have to just reiterate what Frank said in the beginning. Our team has been super thrilled to be involved in the park and the park design, and helping to think about that vision as we move forward in the next 50 years. As he said, we had a tremendous amount of public input. It was great that lots of people came out and kind of gave us their thoughts on the plan. We wanted to put together, we took a long time to kind of distill down all those comments and input, and we wanted to kind of get that into our document in a very high level way. So this diagram begins to try to explain how we took some of those comments, which you see on the left side of the diagram, distilled down to what we call some guiding principles. And those are kind of high level ideas that we wanted to have in front of us so that we could make sure that the design and the plan that we were putting forward was kind of in line with what the public wanted to see and the design that the city needed going forward. So we distilled that down to a few bullet points, and we have this on the screen. You can read some of the detail on those, but just to touch on the sustainability, that's a really often, widely used word, and it's a very broad term. It can cover everything from material selection through design, through programming, all the way actually through maintenance of the park and how we kind of utilize that park through that whole spectrum. And that was a really important facet of the design. And we feel like we've incorporated that into a lot of the thoughts about how the park will go forward in the future. And particularly, thinking about the ecology of the park and the water quality of the park. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. Authenticity, that was a big topic that the public chimed in on. We have a beautiful park today. It has a personality and a character that I think people love. I think people want to see that rise to the surface, even though we want to bring that park to a whole new level from a programming standpoint and think about the next 50 years. We still want to be true to the character of the park. And they specifically said that they did not want to see any theming or themed elements. So we were trying to live to that throughout the design. And I'd say livability and emerging city, I tend to think of those kind of hand in hand. And when you think about livability, often parks and open spaces are a big part of that. As places continue to grow and urbanize, it's often the parks and open spaces that make those places livable, whether it's, recreation or exercise or playgrounds for the kids, or just, have a place of respite or a place to, be able to touch the ecology of the park and see wildlife. All those things are critically important as the city continues to urbanize. And think about, as we grow on the residential side and we grow businesses and we become this world-class city that we all are working so hard to bring forward, we hope that we can bring Lake Eola Park to be a world-class park. Next slide. So this is our overall master plan. Like we said, we have a tremendous amount of input through the design process. This plan has actually gone through many iterations. You're going to see today that like I said, we've distilled down a lot of the comments. Some of the comments that we heard actually resulted in some physical, redesign of components of the plan. Some of those comments will actually be infused into our final report document. And then I think even some of those comments and input pieces that we received will actually go further than that and probably, come into play when we get further into the detailed design and the implementation of the park. So they'll all kind of be incorporated throughout that process. But just to kind of break this plan down, the way that we looked at this plan is activity zones kind of throughout the park, or the feature areas as we call them. And I think they're all probably very familiar to you. The plaza in the amphitheater on the west side of the plan, the Terra seating area on the south side of the plan is a big activity zone. The gateways on the east, particularly the gateway from Thornton Park and that southeast quadrant, is a big activity zone, as we all know, particularly with the farmers market on the weekend. The activity zone with a play on the middle portion of the park on the west, the northeast with its kind of gateway effect as you come in from the east and arrive at the park and experience that park. And then the lake edge itself. We actually took a lot of time thinking about the lake edge, the ecology of the lake edge, how that lake edge can maybe help us think about the design of the stormwater system as it comes into the lake on those points, and think about ways to improve the ecology and the water quality of the lake. And then even getting to the perimeter of the park, we thought a lot about the perimeter roadways and streets and the role that they play in arriving at the park, opportunities for creating thresholds at certain destinations in the park. And then in particular, I would say Lake Eola Drive. I mean, that is a street that we paid special attention to in terms of, how it plays such an important role in the program for the bigger events in particular. So we're going to take our time to kind of, dive into this plan, get into some detail. We're going to kind of march our way kind of counterclockwise through the plan and share some visioning with you, and then make sure that we leave enough time at the end to come back for some questions and comments. And Max and I are going to be kind of tag teaming this because we've got quite a bit of architectural design work to share with you as well today. So next slide. So the West Plaza, or the Washington Street Plaza in the amphitheater area, obviously that's a big activity zone in the park. As you arrive from the downtown area, that's your first impression. It's the big view down Washington Street out to the fountain. That's obviously a high intensity, high activity zone. The amphitheater that we all know and love so much. A couple of the high level ideas revolving around that is that, and we received actually a lot of input on this as well, is, how do we grow that facility? How do we keep the original character and personality and the look and the feel of the core structure there, But how can we bring an intervention there that will make that more usable, more comfortable, maybe allow for bigger events, allow for bigger audience attendance there. So we kind of started with an idea of how do we maybe think about that facility a little bit differently. If you've been there, you know that, as the audience sits, there's a lot of circulation around the backside of the audience, which often can be disruptive. So one of our big moves was, what if we took that circulation and thought about that a little bit differently and made that go back around the backside of the amphitheater with a brand new promenade that would be cantilevered out over the lake edge. It actually gives you a fantastic, kind of commanding view of the lake, which you don't really have today. And it gets that circulation out of the middle of the amphitheater. We also wanted to add some more shading and more opportunity for the IT side of the performance to have an infrastructure. So we have a large overarching canopy that will provide that shade in that facility for the stage area without actually coming in contact. And you're going to see some really fantastic views from Max on how that canopy kind of drapes over and provides kind of an extension of the amphitheater band shell effect. And then in the outfield, to provide more seating in a much more casual way, we've extended the audience up by about another third, but that's going to be an artificial turf sloped area. So it'd be a much more casual area. Families could throw out blankets. It expands the seating by about 750 people. And then to provide comfort in that area, we also have a cantilevered shade structure that encompasses that full arc across the back of the structure. So that really starts to provide a better sense of enclosure, better shade for comfort. I think it with that envelope being a little bit more controlled, I think it gives you more control over the programming of that element. And then it keeps the operations of the park and the promenade and all the activity on the outside can function on its own with no interruption there. And then lastly, I think the Plaza is, thinking about that as kind of pre-event and post-event. And for the big events like at Christmas time, we really wanted to expand that Plaza. It's probably twice as big as it is originally today. We wanted to expand the statement palms as a big gesture down both sides to help frame that view from downtown. You'll see a water feature on the edge of Robinson to help kind of with that foreground focal point, but also to help buffer some of the sound from the traffic as you're in that space. We've bumped out to the south to allow a little space for food trucks and, to add that kind of level of activity in the Plaza. And then on the edge on the lake, we've actually let that cascade down with a series of steps to reach the water so that you can really get down to water's level and see the wildlife and experience the lake edge in a way that you really can't do that today. And the last band there is really is what we call a biodetention area. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. You'll see those kind of reoccurring around the plan in different forms. We have a lot of stormwater outfall into the lake, and today as it exists, a lot of that stormwater is entering the lake kind of unchecked. So we've got an idea about how we intercept that water in biodetention areas, which are essentially kind of filtration systems at the end of those lines, which we hope will help tremendously with water quality. But they're also in this plan, as you'll see, have become a big part of kind of the placemaking elements as you experience that lake edge around the perimeter. In fact, you can see on the bottom, just before we leave this slide, on the bottom of this, you'll see one of the larger biodetention areas. They often take this kind of crescent form around the perimeter of the lake, and you'll see on the outside edge, we're utilizing that basin structure as a way to create a boardwalk that really gets you out over the water and experience the lake in a way that you just can't do that today. And in this case in particular, I think it allows us to get out close to the rookery, maybe have some interpretive elements there. We have some definitive ideas about the rookery, maybe revegetating that in a way that's more supportive of the bird life there, maybe having a wash down system with irrigation so that you don't really have the smell that we've all kind of experienced there, but it would make that a much more aesthetically pleasing element to view and actually function a lot better for wildlife. Next slide. So we've got a series of perspective views here that give you a much better idea of what we're talking about in terms of the scale and the design elements of the plaza. You'll see the fountain in the foreground that becomes this kind of buffer to the street, the wayfinding kind of iconic standing letters of Eola in the fountain, the addition of the palm trees down both sides to help with that kind of spatial definition and the view to the fountain, for providing kind of broken shade for users of the space. And then ample seating, but you'll see some of the plank benching benches around the perimeter of the palms, and then low seat walls around right on the outsides of the space that really start to add a lot of seating components to the plaza. And then you'll see the food trucks in the shaded area to the right. All of that kind of working in concert together, begins to activate the space in a way that it's just not activated today. And you can see the amphitheater structure just beyond that Max is going to talk about in a second. Next slide. This would be a view looking from the south side back towards the amphitheater. So you can see the food trucks to the left and the fountain to the right. And we still felt like it was very important, even beyond the fountain element at the head of the park on the west side of the plaza, to maintain that large, open, kind of flexible space in the main body of the plaza for events like setting up the Christmas tree and other holiday events. And hopefully, that's going to be a tremendous kind of pre and post function space for the amphitheater that I think will help as that facility gets larger and larger events, and you need the ability to stage more people there. And just to add, the opportunity to bring more and more programming to that space as we continue to grow as a city. Next slide. This is a view looking from Roslyn, just on the north side of the fountain, kind of down the axis to the fountain and with the amphitheater on the left. Next slide. Another view, this is really more of a straight on view down Washington Street, looking straight onto the fountain. You'll see the idea behind a fountain there is to have something that was not only kind of visually pleasing, but something that would fill that space with the sound of water and manipulate the water in a way that where people could still touch it, get cooled off, engage it, and it becomes a kind of an activity that we just don't see in the park today. Next slide. And I think we're going to transition. One of the things that we also think a lot about as you think about the kind of the ceremony of this park is how it transitions from day to night, and what that means from a security standpoint, but just creating kind of that iconic view of the park and lighting the water, uplighting the trees. We've added festoon lighting down both sides of the plaza, draped between the new statement palms to give kind of an ambiance to the space. So though the lighting is low, it really creates a feeling of safety and security as well without kind of being overwhelming. Next slide. And I think we're going to transition to Max here to talk a little bit about the architecture of the amphitheater.
Hey, thanks, Donald. I do want to appreciate everybody for spending their lunch time with us. We still have a lot to go, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. So what you're looking at in this slide is a view from the west side of the property, looking over the retaining wall that helps support the new green lawn. That lawn helps extend the seating for the amphitheater itself. And Don had talked about the canopy that we're going to have over top of that. One of the things you'll see is a lot of Art Deco design work thrown in. We've done it very lightly, but we did that to respect the design of the existing band shell. Two things that we kept in mind throughout this design. First and foremost, not to do any harm to the band shell. And we didn't. We didn't touch the band shell. We are recommending that it gets refurbished and on some of the spaces on the inside, let those get reworked. But the band shell will remain the same. It will be painted, some other upgrades, but we're not going to touch it. And we did some other things. If you look at the way most amphitheaters are set up in stages, they don't normally face west. Because this one is facing west, you've got a functional problem because the sunlight is coming directly into the eyes of the performers if you have a performance from midday forward. So some of what we came up with is a response to that functional issue. And that's why you see the very large canopy in front of the stage, and it covers a portion of the seating as well. But it creates a dynamic view. It really becomes a very spectacular, and it turns this into a major venue. But it's also a functional response because it keeps the sun out of the eyes of the performers. And now the performance, I think, can go to another level. It also provides an area that we can put in more theatrical lighting, and we can get that lighting out in front of the stage. So now you can light the faces of the performers, more audio visual. So we think this really enhances the theatrical experience that you're going to see. Go to the next slide. So this is looking from the north, south, and you're getting the north side of the venue. And so if you look at the large canopy, the stage canopy, you see where we've done some decorative lighting. You can almost have a light show on that. And the idea is we're thinking the light show could be a part of the theatrical experience that can also happen on the inside of that canopy and really help take that theatrical experience to the next level. It's not something you would have every day. I can see this as a 4th of July, different things. But you can also see how that canopy is respecting the band shell. And the colors of the band shell are more vibrant because, again, we are going to paint it. You can see the Art Deco detailing for the railing going around the perimeter at the base of the band shell. That's existing. So we picked up on those cues and we kind of sprinkle it throughout the project. You can go to the next slide. This is a daytime shot, more of an aerial perspective. But the thing I like about this is it starts to put this whole thing into context as far as the scale is concerned. So you get a better feel for what is this really going to look like relative to the existing facility. And I think that really speaks 1,000 words when you see it laid out like that. And you start to pick up on the circulation that Donald was talking about earlier that goes around the backside of the facility, get you much closer to the edge of the water. We think that was a smart move. Being able to take that out, not have to go through the seating area itself, that worked out fantastic. And you can also see the raised lawn seating in the rear that extends the seating for the facility with the canopy above that. You can go to the next slide. This is a dusk shot. And one thing you'll notice about the canopy is one of the materials we use is perforated metal for the skin of the canopy. We did that so that you don't completely obscure the band shell. It becomes translucent. So when you're looking at it from a distance, you can still see through that canopy and get the silhouette of the band shell. So it doesn't go away. But we did push it as far to the west as possible because we still wanted to have coverage over the stage. We thought that was important. And we were trying to cover a portion of the front row seating as well. Next slide. Donald.
Yeah, so jumping back to the common area, this is a section through the promenade just to the rear of the amphitheater that we described. This would be a brand new segment of walk. Like I said, we wanted that to be a very generous in width because there will be times when that's accommodating kind of pre and post, event staging, and then also just users of the park in general. So we wanted that to not only be very wide in its width, we wanted to have kind of a boardwalk feel because we wanted to cantilever that out over the water. Like I said, you get a very commanding view of the lake at that point. We also will have some landscape and continue that kind of statement palm row around the back of the amphitheater there. You'll see we picked up on some of that Art Deco railing that Max was mentioning. But we felt like it was important to get a little bit of buffer and separation between that main promenade of the park and then the back of house area of the amphitheater. And you'll see some images on the right there that maybe kind of speak to kind of the aesthetic target of what we're trying to get to with the addition of that wide promenade. Next slide. So continuing around the park, you'll see the Sperry Fountain in the lower left. We've essentially kept that untouched. We've enlarged the plaza just a bit. We've added some larger palms there. We also widened the stairs out because today it's very narrow and we wanted just kind of a wider, more gracious kind of gesture down into the park and into that plaza. Off to the left of that, since that is really one of the thresholds into the park and there's really no accessible way into that park at that point, we've kind of slipped an ADA ramp down the side of that we think we can kind of tuck into the landscape very sensitively. And as you continue around the plan, you get to the Terra seating area. I think if you've all experienced the park today, you know that well. It's, the upper levels feel a little bit separated with that landscape zone between them and the promenade. And then you're very high above the water there. And we wanted to kind of take a step back, keep the terracing concept there, but maybe take a different tack to it. Because this has actually become one of the most prominent entries into the park with all the high-rise development to the south, where Lake Avenue dead ends into the park, and with all the commercial development along Central, a lot of people feed down these streets and into the park at these points. So we've made the kind of the portals on each end, much wider, much more gracious kind of stairways down to the park. We've cascaded this edge down to the park with a series of wide concrete steps. There would be a ADA ramp along the top side that would slip down to the promenade, so it'd be very accessible. But to provide that shade on these concrete terraces that would take you down to the promenade and then continue right down to the water's edge, we've actually planted trees within those concrete terraces to provide the shade along that corridor. And then the idea of having some really oversized, like 15 to 20 foot wide umbrellas that get in, steel umbrellas that get embedded into those concrete terraces. So you have a really nice mixture along that terracing of mechanical provided shade, structure provided shade, and then tree canopy, which I think will help have a tremendous cooling effect. And then right in the middle, you'll see a little notch kind of carved out. That comes from some of the input that we had during our review process of maybe having a little niche there for impromptu performances, maybe jazz performances on the weekend, but still allowing for a space for that. But then that could double as a little bit of an overlook into the water and into the LID zones there that you see on the edge. And I think if you go to the next slide, there'll be a section of this. So you can see the upper level, we were very sensitive to the historic oaks along the street there. We've got a very generous wide green space that will help maintain the oaks over time. We have the upper level terraces down to the promenade, a very wide promenade that's 15 to 20 feet wide, and then a series of lower steps to take you right down to the water's edge, where we want to provide, a newly planted littoral zone. We actually have the idea of having some faux logs there, because if you've experienced that, you know that that's one of the areas where you see a lot of wildlife, a lot of turtles, a lot of birds. So we want to have a little bit of habitat creation there so people can get down right to that water's edge and be able to see wildlife up close. And you see the ideas of having those tree canopies embedded right in those terraces. And you see this, if you experience this in Chicago on a much larger scale, we feel like we can bring that kind of aesthetic and that kind of performance, right to this lake edge at a little bit different scale. Of course, those tree canopies would have soil cells, planted at the base of them, which is really a substructure that allows those to give the roots a chance to grow and spread, and for those trees to be healthy and develop a broad canopy. So we're really excited about the idea of kind of re-envisioning that terraced area. Move on. And the southeast quadrant, obviously, most of us know this area very well. It houses the majority of the farmers market activities. This was a big consideration on how we thought about circulation and how you arrive at the park. But one of the things that I think really struck everybody about this part of the park is what we call the Cove. And you can see this little indentation in the lake edge that really is just an amazing, beautiful surrounding of mature cypress canopy that I think today, with the T-shaped bridge that is kind of draped over that cove, you really don't have an appreciation for. And that T-shaped bridge is really mostly about facilitating just direct circulation and kind of a shortcut across that cove. So we took a step back as we looked at this and said, what if there was another way to use that bridge, at least in part, and to really open that cove completely up to the lake and maybe create a new venue there. So we thought, if we were to cut that bridge back to halfway, we could re-envision how, the aesthetic form of that bridge. We could actually move the swan boat facility, rental facility, over to that cove, which we think it really deserves, because it needs more space. I think it's a very popular activity in the park, and we felt like as we did our analysis of the park that it really needed a place of its own, because it felt a little bit kind of tacked on where it is today. And so we thought, let's move that to the cove and completely re-envision the cove. And with that, we also had to take the promenade around the backside of the cove. So we've kind of brought that down, which allowed us to kind of connect the southeast corner of the park much more in an engaging way, because that circulation fade just kind of cuts across and it kind of isolates that we felt like the southeast corner of the park. And of course, that realigned circulation would be very wide. It would be wide enough to accommodate all the tents set up for the farmers market and the other festivals, and allow for, still plenty of room for circulation. In the turnabout at Osceola, we all felt like that also was one of those more utilitarian kind of areas. It felt like it was really designed as kind of a delivery area and mostly for vehicles. And we really wanted to kind of think about that kind of fundamentally differently. And design that as kind of a pedestrian first kind of experience and make it feel more like a plaza. So we re-envision that as a flush kind of shared space that would extend back to the east all the way to the mature canopy that you see in the center of the drawing there, creating this much larger plaza, all at the same level with the drop-off zone so that it feels like a pedestrian plaza, anchored in the middle by a more formal dining area. And we think we would have one of the comments that also came out of our review was that we really need some architectural shade. We love our trees. We are going to be considerate of all the trees in the park and think about the next generation of trees coming up, but I think we need more architectural shade in the park. So in this central space in this plaza where we would have a formal dining area, we've included this multi-tiered kind of folded metal canopy structure that would provide year-round shade and become a kind of an iconic element in the park itself. And of course, all this is playing a part of one of the threshold and portal ideas as you come from Thornton Park and you make your way through the plaza and arrive at the Swan Boat area. And then, another piece of input that was really came through kind of loud and clear on our public input was, let's maintain the lawn areas. As much as we love the activities within the park, the open lawn areas are extremely valuable and important, and we love the flexibility of that. So we were very deliberate about realigning that promenade around the Cove, but also maintaining that multi-use kind of multi-function open lawn area on that southeast corner. And I think kind of the last gesture before we go to some perspectives is the extension of Washington. That's another one of those really important kind of view corridors from Thornton Park as you kind of look beyond the terminus of that and through the cypress trees into the fountain beyond. We feel like we wanted to bring that space up to flush. Also, just let that be an open kind of flexible space for food trucks and just for pedestrian use and maybe even a temporary stage setup so that the lawn area could be used for the audience viewing. And then lastly, I think the Eola house, which also felt a little bit kind of out of play as we looked at the master plan. By realigning that walkway round to the east, we have allowed for some outdoor event space for that facility. That's become a hugely popular facility for wedding venues and receptions, and it really needed some outdoor space of its own. So we extended that promenade far enough to the east to get that breakout space, and then added the fountain in front with the extension of Washington with that little character piece to act somewhat as like a forecourt to the Eola house to really kind of elevate the common area for the Eola house. I think if you go to the next view, you'll see, and this is an example of how that might work on an event day or for the farmers market. So we were extremely considerate of, only widening the pavements as much as we needed to allow for all the tent setups, which we think will be better for the vendors, which a lot of them are setting up in grass today and it's not level. And you have damage to the landscape and to the turf and compaction to the tree root zones. So we wanted to make sure the tent setup for all the facility for all these festivals were actually on paved surfaces, so that all the consideration was given to set up for the big event day and allowing for adequate circulation and dining and food trucks to have the full event be comfortable, and then still have other users of the park kind of be comfortable as well. Go to the next slide. I think this will start some series of views. This is the view kind of looking to the south. You'll see the fountain and the amphitheater beyond, but this is the T-shaped bridge that kind of overlays the Cove right now. You can see we've cut that back to about the halfway point. We've added what we call a swan wing shade structure. There'll be a really artistic kind of wood plank platform bench there. It really starts to actually, I think, begin to program that space in a way that it's not used today. The bridge today is really mostly about circulation. It's very hot. There's really not any program at all actually happening on that bridge. And I think this takes the bridge and actually makes a place out of it. And then we've added a significant amount of swan boat docking, more than we've got today. And then it allows us to continue to expand that docking as we grow, and we maybe need more of that over time. And I think we'll go to an eye level view. And you'll also notice that down at the lake level, we've revegetated that lake edge and maintained virtually all of that cypress canopy around that cove. So this is a view kind of down at the bridge level, looking out to the swan boat docks. You'll see the seating that we talked about in the mid-ground, and then beyond that, the canopy. And then we also cantilevered that west edge of the dock out a bit and created kind of a high top bar along the railing there, because a lot of times people will get food at the farmer's market and there's really no place to sit and they're trying to enjoy that. And so we wanted to create kind of a quasi kind of standing dining zone in the shade of that canopy. So there's a kind of a standing level bar top along all the full length of that railing. And of course, this would be lit similarly to the fountain that you saw in the plaza at the amphitheater plaza. Go on to the next slide. And then as we move along to the east side of the park, we felt like this is a really popular part of the park with the playground there. My kids grew up going to that park. And even when they were small children, we felt like, I knew the park was always crowded. The playground was always overcrowded. So we know that there's a huge amount of demand there. I mean, this is another one that was kind of right up at the top in terms of input from the public on, we want to see more play elements. We want to see more play elements that are accommodating all age ranges and much more in being inclusive through all ability levels. So we felt like in the kind of the middle portion of this plan on the park, there were some underutilized spaces, so that we wanted to kind of rethink this whole eastern edge of the park as a play kind of activity zone. And the hub of that space would be the new restroom building that Max is going to talk about in a second. But I think you'll see that it's much more than just replacing the restroom. I call it a pavilion because it's going to incorporate the restrooms. There'll be a concession there. It's got a very interesting kind of architectural, very iconic canopy over the front. And the front half of that structure that you see in the plan is actually just a dining zone where parents could hang out. It allows them to have a really commanding view of the playgrounds to the south and the playgrounds to the north. And then we've added a splash pad kind of out in front of that, because one of the things that families also wanted to see in the park was the ability to have water for interaction, for cooling, for kids to have another kind of play element. That was a big piece that everybody thought was really missing. So you can see that this part of the park really becomes kind of a full length activity zone. The plan to the south would be like it is today generally for younger kids, maybe 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. We've incorporated right in the north east quadrant of that into that deep shade area, a place for parents to kind of sit inside that envelope, and it's all secured with a perimeter fence. And then as you move to the north, we wanted to be that a play zone for much, for the older age group of kids, and maybe much larger, more sculptural, more dynamic pieces of play equipment. And that's all tied together by this pavilion structure. So, and then you can also see just on the lake edge is another one of the biodetention areas with an opportunity to engage the water. And then we wanted to also maintain the Swan Beach, knowing how important the swans are to everyone in the city. And they really enjoy the sand beach there for feeding, for getting close and getting photos of the swans. So we incorporated that into this zone, knowing that, this becomes really kind of a family-oriented area with all those activities. Go to the next slide. And we put together just a collage of imagery to illustrate just how far we've come with play equipment. Play equipment today has become much larger, much more sculptural, much more dynamic, and it really becomes a very artistic gesture in itself, we feel. And we'd like to see that kind of infused both in the south area and the north area, and even start to think about landscape as an element for play. And how do we marry those two together, create earth forms that become artistic gestures and really become kind of iconic art elements in themselves. So these are examples of some of the ideas that we would like to see infused into those two play areas. And Max is going to talk a little bit about the restroom pavilion.
Thanks, Donald. So what you're looking at is a three-dimensional floor plan of the East Western facility. There's a lot of different things going on here, but I'll try to cut to the chase. Just to let you know up front, this restroom is more than twice the size of the existing facility. So the facilities have expanded. Not to mention, we've added other amenities onto the restroom building because, I agree with Dom, this is more than just a restroom. This is a pavilion. And we wanted to activate the space, and that does several things. Because our main design mission here was security. We want to make sure that whatever we do, we provide a restroom that's going to be secure so people feel comfortable using it. So to make a secure restroom, because you can't have cameras in a restroom, there's several things you need to do. It becomes secure if you open up the acoustics, meaning if you're in the restroom, you scream, people will hear you on the outside. We strategically have two entrances. So you can come in on one end, on the south end, and you go out on the north end. That's great because if someone's coming after you, you can just run in any direction and you'll get out of the restroom. But it also is good for facilities. If they need to shut down a portion of the restroom for repair, they still have an entrance to get into the other half. So there's a practical side to it, either way you slice it. And so on the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a concession area that faces the plaza, which faces the lake. And that plaza in the building is, like Don said, is strategically located between the play areas. So you can just imagine a parent or parents coming to this area with their kids and they want to go into the play area. Instead of just standing there, you can come get something to eat, something to drink, sit under the plaza, under the canopy, and be able to see your kids play and keep an eye on them. So we thought that was really important. We love that idea, but to make this even more activated and more of a multi-purpose space, we made that canopy fairly large. Go to the next slide. Okay, so now you start to see what we're talking about with this canopy. It's a plaza, but we see this as a multi-purpose plaza. We wanted to have the canopy large enough so, yeah, you could have casual dining. You could take the seats away, put them into the storage area, and this could be space, programmable space for different activities. You could have a boot camp here for exercise. You could have a Zumba class, yoga. Someone could come here and give a speech to a crowd. There's a lot of different things that can happen. But the idea is we wanted to get it activated so that people would be around the restrooms. So you would never have to use that restroom and feel like you're isolated somewhere and put away to the side. The materials that we're using for the restroom, everything here is very durable. We've got a structural steel frame that's supporting it. At the base, we've got ground phase concrete block. And on top of that, which looks like wood, is actually a cementitious panel. On the inside, we're using polished concrete floors, wall tiles. Everything we're putting in there is to be able to come in, spray this thing down, keep it clean, and keep it functional. You can see the louvers across the top. That does several things. It helps with the acoustics, but it also helps with the airflow. So you're getting air coming in at the base. We've got louvers at the base of the walls, and then it flows out through the top. So there will be no air conditioning except for fans, but because of the amount of airflow we have going through the facility, it should feel fairly comfortable. Go to the next slide. This is just another shot of it. Looking at the rear of the facility, this is what you would see from Eola Drive, and it's facing the other, you can see the other canopy facing out towards the lake, and the entrance going into the restrooms on the side. There's also a janitor's closet on either side as well. Next slide. So we've got some very nice lighting that we're going to have in this facility, up lights and down lights built into the columns. The columns give opportunity for branding. I can see banners and different things hanging from there. So we just envision a lot of different activities and this becoming a part of the programmable space for the lake. Next slide. Donald?
Yeah, so getting back to the perimeter streets, as we touched on earlier, Eola Drive, we think is going to be a really important part of the plan. If you go to the next slide, if you're aware, one of the things that's happening right now is kind of re-envisioning Robinson Street to be a safer, more traffic calm street. Part of that idea is including a median. There'll be a multi-use trail along that street as well. But with that restructuring of that street, kind of reproportioning that street with the median that won't be able to be used for big events like it's used today with a tent setup and the big races there. So we think Eola can become the replacement for that. And you'll see in this concept plan here that we've kind of taken a step back in that right of way, using the same amount of right of way, but kind of reproportioning that space. We've taken the parallel parking that was on the edges moved it to the middle, and then also consolidated some of the median. You'll know the median is very broken today. The curbs are broken. There's a lot of compaction there, but we've kept the median planting just around the large kind of signature oaks there. It'll be structured, it'll be aerated, it'll be planted. So it'll be overall, it'll be much healthier for those trees. And then we've also made much wider pedestrian connections on both sides of that street and brought the complete gesture up to a flush shared space. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, one of the reasons that we wanted to open that street up so is that, with the parking that occurs along the middle of that zone, when you block that street off for big events, that becomes the space for the tent setup, and it gives you ample room to set up a tremendous amount of tents along that corridor. This is a section of the existing section today. You'll see the lanes are fairly wide at 12 feet. You have that very wide kind of compacted median, relatively narrow sidewalks on both sides. So, we use that 67 feet just in a different way. You'll see, go to the next slide, you'll see how we kind of reproportion that street. You'll notice that it's all up at one flush level. So when you set that up for events and festivals, you don't have people trying to negotiate those curbs and tripping and, having those kind of grade level changes across that corridor. You'll see the parking in the middle there. It's back end angled parking. We feel like that's very easy to maneuver. And that's the space that kind of flexes and becomes this festival space. We've draped festoon lighting over the space to give that overall street a little bit of a ceiling and create some of that ambiance during the big events in the evenings. We have some green streets also in that street as well. We've extended that gesture all the way down the full length of Eola. Eola on the south side today has very little parking and very little street canopy, and we feel like we can bring some of those design components of that flush shared space street to the north all the way to the south. In the next slide, you'll see how that again also becomes, those parallel parking spaces become a great spot for tent setup. And in fact, you could probably set up on the other side of the street as well. So that begins to function as a really nice extension of that southeast corner for the big farmers market events. This is an existing section today with a wide travel lanes, very little planting. You'll go to the next slide. You'll see we maintain the multi-use path along the west side of that street to provide that connectivity from Robinson to the bike network trails that are being developed to the south of downtown. Again, you have a flush curb condition, parallel parking, and a green streets treatment on that segment of street. Next slide. So the northeast quadrant, we feel like this is also a big impression. As you approach from the east on Robinson, we have the sculpture there. That's the one point where you get the kind of the first big view and the big gesture of the park. So we wanted to create a little bit of more of a plaza there to kind of ground the sculpture in the corner. That's going to be one of the places where the neighborhoods in North Cross in the Robinson Street plan. So we bring them down into the plaza and then turn them towards the fountain along axis to get that big commanding view of the lake. And then you would move underneath the canopy of that large historic oak tree there. Under the space of that oak today is where you have the duck pond and the large kind of sprawling water feature. We love the idea of that, but we felt like we could pull that gesture back a bit, center it around the sculpture there, have it more of a aquatic garden kind of effect, flatten the bridge out, and then still have that kind of cascade down to the lake. But so maintaining that water feature, but just re-envisioning it a little bit and kind of having it take up a little less real estate. And with the space that we gained under the large tree by reducing that fountain, we've actually incorporated a small hardscape plaza area. This is one of the areas that we also got a lot of feedback by the big event users for kind of pre and post event space and being able to set up tables and, for refreshments after big races and big events. So this creates a place under the structure of this big tree where they could do that. It could be comfortable. And it's also a place where they're using today for weddings and for receptions. So we think that that small plaza area can be kind of a multifunctional space. We've had a very light touch on the peninsula and maintained some large palm trees there, but the turf area we've maintained so you could get out to the lake edge there and have the view back towards downtown. We've maintained the teeing, but we've actually just reduced the decking because there's a lot of maintenance that goes along with maintaining all that wood decking. And we felt like it was a little bit of a distraction with the architecture there. So we've reduced that quite a bit. And then we've set all that up around a framework of walkways that you'll notice that they're very deliberate on ending on the axial views of architecture or the big view of the lake or the view to the fountain. It's very directed and very deliberate, but it also allowed us to expand that lawn area to the north. So we have a really significant multi-purpose lawn area that even extends a little bit around and wraps the corner to the west. So we've got more open space there than we do today. Continuing around the lake on the north side, part of the Robinson Street plan will have a plateaued intersection at Broadway to help with that traffic calming effect. We'd like for that gesture to kind of continue straight into the park with what we call kind of a social meet and greet plaza. That there'll be a multi-use trail along the south side of Robinson. So we think that's an important kind of meet and greet destination. And that is an area today where we have a real short pier that gets out just over the water's edge, but we felt like the north side of the lake really needed something there that was more iconic, kind of a focal point in itself, and a way to kind of get completely out over the water in a way that we can't today. So we've included a pier that perhaps has some level change to it. It could take you down closer to the water level. We've got a high level metal canopy that might have bench swings in it, so that could really be a new point for congregation and meet and greet that we don't have today, that, perhaps you could gather there for the big sunset views of downtown and have just kind of this amazing Instagram moment with the skyline in the background with those big sunset views over the lake. So we're really excited about adding a new element to that side of the park. Other than the pier structure there, we've tried to keep the promenade generally in the same alignment that it is today, because we've got a lot of mature canopy, beautiful cypress tree canopy there that we want to maintain. So we've kind of had a very light touch along this edge. You'll see another one of the biodetention areas, the smaller ones where we have a smaller outfall there. And then as you continue around, we get around to the other restroom on the next slide. So we have our west restroom and the Relax Grill. We kept the west restroom with a very linear orientation because that actually serves as a really nice architectural screen to the park facilities, the maintenance facilities behind that. And then we have between those structures, we've maintained that small drive down to the lake where you have the service boat access. We think we can gate that and just kind of screen that area off. With the Relax Grill, even though we don't have an architectural design for that today, we have an idea about, maybe a cluster of small outbuildings of the same vein and materiality as you've seen with the other restrooms, but centered around that large oak tree there to create kind of a courtyard effect. And with the relocation of the swan boats to the southeast corner, we've kind of opened up that really nice lake edge there. We've widened the walkway through because that's kind of a pinch point there on the promenade. We've got the opportunity for some outdoor dining. We've got a little point that we've kind of extended out so you could get some dining right out at the water's edge. And we've kind of wrapped that with one of the biodetention areas so that you really start to feel like you're sitting right at that vegetated edge where you can be close to wildlife and close to the water. And continuing around, Max is going to take you through a little bit of detail on this west pavilion.
Thanks, Donald. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We're kind of running out of time. Architecturally, this restroom is very similar to the previous one. The way we set it up, geometrically, it is laid out a little bit differently. This one has a main lobby that feeds into both the men and the women's restroom. But one thing I didn't mention before, one of the things we've added to these restrooms on both sides are family rooms. And these family restrooms are also gender neutral restrooms. So that's an added feature that we've added to the east and to the west. And we think this is going to be very beneficial in the long run. But this also has 2 ways in, just like the previous one. One of the nice things about this, it is set up a little different, is that the concession is broken into 2 parts. We have one on the north, one on the south. It creates a little more intimate of a situation as compared to the previous one. You go to the next slide. So off to the left, you can see the main canopy, which accentuates the main lobby going into the restrooms. You can see someone going into the restroom from the opposite door. And then on the corner, you've got the concession area and a nice little cozy seating area on the back. Now, those seating areas are very strategically located in the sense that you've got a beautiful view of the lake. You're in the cover, not just the canopy, but also the trees. And it sets up a slightly different situation than the previous one. Next slide. As you can see, the materials, like Donald was saying, they're very similar. It's just the geometry is different, but it's the same architectural language that we're using. Next slide. This is a close-up, and you can start to see the wall panels that we talked about. They do look like wood. They're painted to mimic wood, but they're cementitious. It was very important that we use heavy-duty, very durable materials and something that's going to last. We're trying to be good stewards over this design that could be in place for the next 20 to 30 years. We want to make sure it's not just functional, but it's also going to be aesthetically pleasing. Next slide. Donald.
Yeah, so we're going to jump back a little bit and talk about the lake edge. I know we want to make sure we have enough room for Q&A, so I know Shiva is going to move me along here, but we want to talk a little bit about a series of how we treated the lake edges and how we thought about the lake edges. You can see we've talked about the biodetention areas that you see, these crescents around the perimeter of the lake that provide also an opportunity to get out over the water. Those are the outfalls where you have large pipes coming into the lake. So all of the rainwater from the surrounding neighborhoods and in downtown and the streets today comes into this lake unchecked. So all of the bags and the cups and the heavy metals and the oils and the things that are in all of that water today is going directly into the lake unchecked. So that's really what's kind of led to some of the lower quality levels of the water there. So we wanted to kind of think about how do we not only think about just revegetating the lake edge and improving the ecology and the wildlife habitat of the lake edge, but how do we use those elements as sustainable features and fundamentally think about the stormwater a different way so that we can improve the water quality of Lake Eola over time. Go to the next slide. So we have a series of sections that are kind of just typicals of the lake edge. Today, I'm sure you've all seen where we have the segmental block walls that are the retaining from the upland down to the water. You know, the Parks Department has a lot of issues with maintaining that. We have people throwing those blocks into the lake. So we really wanted to do something that was much more permanent, easy to construct. So we put it up a very thin profile concrete wall at that edge that'll allow us to deal with some of the erosion issues on the upland side, but also get a more defined littoral shelf on the aquatic, on the lake side. Go to the next slide and you'll see here's an idea of how we would create that extended littoral zone and try to extend that for as much of the periphery of the lake as we can today. Go to the next slide. And where we do, you know, we have a lot of mature cypress canopy at that lake edge where we do engage those big trees. We would transition that concrete wall to a riprap zone to help us traverse that slope. We can vegetate that on the upslope side and the downslope side to help kind of mitigate and blend in that riprap so that it's not so visually obtrusive. And then just a little bit on LID. I think most of you are probably heard about this and understand it, but low impact development, specifically as it kind of relates to thinking about stormwater in a fundamentally different way. Today, as we think about stormwater systems, the rain runs off into the drains at the street, is piped to the local, you know, to the closest pond or lake or retention pond. And like I said, everything that's in that system, it's just a matter, it's just an idea of kind of efficiency of piping it from A to B as efficiently as we can. But everything that is in that water actually ends up in our water bodies. So how do we think about that fundamentally different of daylighting those systems wherever possible into natural systems and try to mimic the way that water is treated in natural areas? And this diagram starts to get to that. You can see on the left is conventional hard engineering approach where you would just pipe A to B, like I mentioned, and everything that's in that rainwater and stormwater goes with it. Once we get that stormwater into a vegetated zone that allows an opportunity for percolation, uptake by the plants, which filters out some of the pollutants. We have recharge of the aquifer, we have filtration by the soil. And that's really the fundamental idea around these biodetention areas. As the stormwater, and there's a section here that will illustrate, as the stormwater outfalls enter into these biodetention chambers, which would be really simple concrete basins, that allows that water to stage up. It becomes, they're fully vegetated with native plant material, which help kind of capture some of that coarse pollutants and allows the pollutants to kind of settle out and do the work that we described in that earlier diagram of filtration and percolation. But then it pops off into the lake in a much cleaner form. So that we have kind of different levels of those around the lake. This illustrates one of the smaller biodetention areas. But if you go to the next slide, we actually have some fairly large pipes outflowing into the lake, and we think that we can get those to work in concert with maybe with some baffle boxes, which are special stormwater structures that help filter out some of the pollutants. With these larger biodetention areas, of course, the basin would be bigger, the walls around it would be slightly bigger. And then we can use that partially for structure for these boardwalks to get some efficiency out of that, kind of serve double duty to define the biodetention, but also support the boardwalk that would get us out over the lake edge. Next slide. And this is a view kind of looking from the pier at Broadway that we described, the new pier, looking back towards the peninsula. And you can see on the left, we wanted to kind of show what that revegetated lake edge might look like. And you can see how you have that very thin profile concrete basin. That is the biodetention cell with even, an aquatic zone beyond that, so that it blends in really seamlessly to that lake edge. But it really it becomes a much more high performing system around the periphery of the lake. And then the last gesture here was just, how do we talked a lot about the portals into the park, but we also want to think about, how do we add some more character at the zones with art, with sculpture, with that become not only just kind of placemaking gestures, but I think to a certain extent they become wayfinding elements in themselves. And we're familiar with some of those, like you see on the sculpture on the lower right, which you have at the gateway to Thornton Park. We feel like those are really important elements that we want to see infused in all the new gateways and the old gateways around the perimeter of the park. And with that, I know that was a lot of information, but I think we're going to turn it back over to Frank to field some of the questions and go through some Q&A with you. Thanks.
Donald, great job. Max, really good job. We have gotten not a ton of questions, but some really good questions. So I'm sort of pulling my way through these, if you'll bear with me for just a second. Let me hit on a couple of high points here. So one of the early questions came in about the considerations for wildlife, specifically waterfowl, because they're such an important part of the park experience itself. And I can tell you, and Donald, most of you probably caught this, but he did talk a little bit about the rookery, which is the island on the southwest corner of the lake. And we know there are times, particularly when it gets particularly hot, when you actually can smell that island. Unfortunately, there are so many birds and so much bird waste. And so the thought was kind of rethinking the landscape, but also creating some irrigation that could wash that down periodically, which would keep that smell down. The other thing that he touched on briefly was the faux logs out by the terraced seating, because that is an area where turtles congregate. And there's a lot of folks that like to sit there and watch the wildlife and watch the turtles. And then the third thing I would say is just generally the ecological touch that now is proposed in the LID basins, as well as the littoral zone plantings around the perimeter of the lake, are going to add a tremendous amount in terms of the overall ecology of that lake, and will attract a lot more wildlife than is already in the park. So I think there are some serious improvements that are proposed. Donald, a couple of things for you. That one of the questions is whether or not the Battle of the Bulge Memorial gets removed. Can you address that really quickly?
Yeah, and I probably skipped over that on that northeast quadrant where we created that little multi-purpose plaza there. We actually have you'll see on the corner, if you were to look at the enlargement, that we've relocated the Battle of the Bulge Memorial. It is still generally in that location. The statue would still be there. The flags are still there. It's just, it houses kind of the anchors that little kind of southeast quadrant of that plaza area. So it's still in the plan.
Okay, thank you. And let me throw this one your way as well. And John may want to answer this also. What are the plans for the ticket kiosk and the Japanese bridge just south of the band shell of the amphitheater area?
Yeah, and again, it's just briefly, I think we probably skimmed over that a bit, but with all the information to cover, but we did rethink that area as well. What may not be apparent to most people there is there's actually a big stormwater outfall there. There's some stormwater chambers that are below grade. So with that, we've actually kind of rethought that garden and wanted to bring that stormwater function to the surface. So we've created kind of a cascading garden there that would daylight that stormwater, send it through a very similar series of biodetention areas and have it pop off into the lake. But we've used that also recreate that kind of serenity that you have with the garden there, to hopefully create that kind of setting with that cascading kind of filter marsh almost effect, and relocated the sculpture in the middle of that to give it a new kind of place to live in that re-envisioned garden area. So the sculpture would still live there. The stormwater function would be daylighted, but I think the John can speak on the kiosk there, whether that would stay or go.
Yes, the old police kiosk is actually absorbed into the new design of the expanded plaza there, so that will disappear.
Next question, really probably for Max and John. I think you'll probably want to partially answer this as well. What acoustical provisions are being made for sound from the band shell being directed at residential buildings immediately across the street? And let me start by saying, excuse me, that a master plan like this at a high level, there's a number of aspects of the overall details of design that just don't really get addressed in a master plan. So at the time that the city should embark, hopefully, on advancing that design into an actual project, those types of things would be considered at that point in time in terms of the details of how to handle the acoustics. But Max, anything else that you want to add to that? And then John, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question, but I agree with you. We can't get too deep into the details, but just a couple of things that I think will really help with the acoustics of that space. By putting in the canopies, you get to direct the sound. The sound is very directional. And by directing the sound, some of the sound is going to get absorbed by that new retaining wall and the lawn that we put on the west side. So you don't have a clear path of sight back to the buildings. It will get broken up. I can't go into a lot more detail other than that. Once we go further into the design, we'll bring in more details on how we can mitigate that. But I think just the overall geometry, the way the spaces are being laid out, and the manipulation that's happened to the amphitheater seating with that green lawn and the canopies, that will help to break up a lot of the sound transmission going across the street.
Right.
I agree totally. I just think it's a level of detail that'll follow up. But I think the new canopy, both near the amphitheater and over the lawn area, will create some opportunities to do some more.
Very good. Thank you, John. Question about the property at the corner of Central and Rosalind, which is the 7-Eleven building. That building houses more than the 7-Eleven, but that's how most folks know it. There were earlier plans, the question goes, for a lake entry at the 7-Eleven corner with a fundraising group. Has this been scrapped? Will that building remain? John, you want to take that?
Sure.
The Orlando Land Trust property.
Correct. The Orlando Land Trust did raise enough funds. They did purchase the property that the 7-Eleven is located in. It is the lower of 3 buildings that are next to it. So the entire property from Lake Eola out to that corner, there's 3 property owners there. We bought the one closest, or actually the land trust purchased the property that's closest to the intersection, which includes the 7-Eleven, that has been turned over to the city. The city is collecting rent right now and working on plans for each of the tenants to be removed from that site.
Thank you, John. Bear with me, folks, as I try and find the rest of these questions. Somebody's asking about timeline for the project. So let me go ahead and address that. There is no funding, to my knowledge, and John, you can add to this here in a minute, to my knowledge, for the improvements to the park. Once this plan is complete, one of the last things that we are charged to do is a high-level cost estimate for what it would take to realize the design that you see in front of you. It is clear that the city is not going to take this project on as one large project. And so what we are going to do as the city's consultant is we'll determine particular smaller project areas and let the city know what we think the costs are associated with that. And then you'll probably see the plan or the park begin to be redeveloped over time, over the years. But at this point, I don't know that there is a dedicated timeline for all of this to begin to occur. Correct? Is that correct, John?
That is correct. The next steps for this plan after we've received the final report is we'll probably send the plan through the Municipal Planning Board and to the Appearance Review Board. And with all the information, I think it should be accepted, but it has to go through that process. And then, of course, those minutes from those reports will then go to council and the plan gets adopted. So it's still a little bit of a process, but we're looking forward to getting through this part in the months to come.
Very good. Another question, what was the thought behind removing the strong east-west axis terminating in the flagpoles that would be on the east side of the park? Many people like to take pictures there. Donald, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and I think that's the area that we referenced where there's a small plaza area. There's a little alley of crepe myrtles that extends out into the water. And I think, you know, looking at that in whole, I think we felt like that was not one of the most highly utilized spaces on the east side of the park. And that even though that is today one of the places where you can actually get out over the water and experience that lake edge, we thought, you know, with all the new opportunity to get out and engage the lake and have, you know, places at the water's edge for photos and views, that it was a little bit of a trade-off to relocate some of that activity, but and to give that space over to the play zone on the east side of the park with a much bigger gesture, with a tremendous need that goes along with that. So we've kind of reallocated that space and really moved the opportunity to touch water and take photos at water's edge to many more locations actually around the periphery of the park.
Very good, thank you. Another question just came in with the addition of the North Pier. I assume no more water ski shows in Lake Eola? John?
That might be a Chris question. What do you think,
Okay.
Chris?
Chris, what do you think?
Well, the plan is not to bring them back. There's a many effects when you bring a water ski show in. Because of the retaining walls, it creates a bathtub effect, so to speak, which makes it unsafe for skiers and the jumpers. And then once we change from the retaining wall, removing that to more of a regular landscape down to the lake, it would also start to destroy the landscape, and we don't want that to happen. So it is not in the plans to bring water ski shows back to Lake Eola.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
A number of people have asked where they can download the master plan or get more information, see the report. Again, if you go to orlando.gov /eolaplan, you'll be able to see the presentation again once the report is complete, which should be relatively soon. You'll be able to see the entire report, read the report. I'm assuming download it. So there'll be much more information than all of this information will be at that website. And I think that's it. And we're pretty much out of time. John, you want to close for us here, please?
Sure.
And let me
yes.
just say on behalf of GAI and Roads and Brito and everyone that's worked on the plan, I do so much appreciate everyone's involvement and assistance in getting us to this point. We really do appreciate it. Okay, John, go ahead, take it away.
Yes, and I second that remark there. That was everything's been through all of COVID and through all of the issues and that we ran into, that these guys, you guys and all the participants really helped pull this through and get us a very nice plan. Yeah, so the thing I want to say is that if you want to go to see not only the plan, but also this presentation, you can go to orlando.gov /eolaplan and find all of that information. I'm not sure exactly when this will be available, maybe very soon. And then if you have any other questions that you want to contact anyone in particular, You'll see on the left side of the screen, Terra Rusikoff. Her phone number is 407-246-4245, and her email address is tara.russakov@orlando.gov. So she will be happy to forward any of your questions to the proper folks that can answer it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes.